The chill of that night still lingers, creeping up my spine like a memory that refuses to fade. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a fresh start for my family and me. But instead, it became a nightmare that would haunt us forever. I'm John Miller, and this is the story of the Thanksgiving we fled our home. We had just moved into a Victorian house on the outskirts of a sleepy Pennsylvania town. It wasn't perfect. The creaky floors, peeling paint, and drafty windows told a story of age and neglect. But Mary, my wife, fell in love with its charm. The wraparound porch, the stained glass windows, and the sprawling backyard seemed perfect for raising Emily and Ethan, our 2 kids. The locals didn't share our enthusiasm. Every time I mentioned the house, they'd glance at each other and shift uncomfortably. "You're moving there?" one of the neighbors had asked, her voice dropping as though someone might overhear. Strange things have happened in that house. I dismissed their warnings as small-town superstition. After all, we'd come here to leave our troubles behind, not to dwell on ghost stories. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the house felt more like home. We'd scrubbed away most of the grime, painted the walls, and filled the rooms with our furniture. Mary insisted on hosting dinner for the extended family. "It'll be a way to christen the house," she said, her excitement contagious. The day arrived, crisp and golden, with fallen leaves crunching underfoot as relatives pulled into our driveway. The house came alive with laughter and the clatter of dishes. Ethan and Emily raced around with their cousins, their giggles echoing through the halls. The air was filled with the rich aroma of turkey roasting and pies baking. It was perfect, almost. It started small. A door upstairs creaked open, though I could have sworn it had been shut. Mary dismissed it, saying the house was old, the wood warped. Then there was the draft. A cold gust swept through the dining room, snuffing out a candle. I checked every window, but they were all locked tight. I tried to ignore it, focus on the family, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't until dinner that the unease spread to everyone else. Emily, my youngest, suddenly stopped eating. Her fork clattered to her plate, and she stared at the far corner of the room, her little face pale as snow. "Emily?" Mary asked gently. "What's wrong?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The man in the corner. He's watching us." I glanced where she was pointing. The corner was empty, nothing but shadows cast by the flickering chandelier. I told her it was just her imagination, but my words felt hollow, even to me. The atmosphere shifted after that. Laughter faded. Conversations grew tense. My aunt kept glancing over her shoulder, while my cousin, usually loud and boisterous, sat quietly, fidgeting with his napkin. Even the kids seemed subdued, their earlier excitement drained. Then it happened. A scream tore through the house. Everyone froze, forks hovering midair, eyes wide with fear. I bolted from my chair, following the sound to the living room. There was Aunt Martha, trembling and pointing at the fireplace. "I saw her," she stammered. "A woman, in a white dress. She walked right into the wall." I tried to calm her, but the sight of her trembling hand and wild eyes shook me to my core. That's when the footsteps started, heavy, deliberate, coming from upstairs. The room went silent. Everyone was there, yet the sound of boots descending the staircase was unmistakable. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and headed toward the stairs. My brother-in-law joined me, his face pale but determined. We climbed, every creak of the steps echoing in the oppressive silence. At the top, the hallway stretched out before us, dim and silent. Every door was closed. We checked the bedrooms, the closets, even under the beds. Nothing, no sign of anyone. We were coming back down when the lights flickered. From the dining room below, we heard a crash, followed by screams. We rushed back to find the chandelier swinging wildly, the family standing around a shattered picture frame. The glass was in shards, the photo beneath it torn down the middle. That's when Mary suggested we go to the basement. It's concrete, she reasoned. Whatever's happening, it won't follow us there. The basement was damp and cold, the kind of place that smelled of mildew and forgotten things. We crowded together, shivering, trying to make sense of the madness. I held Emily close, her little body trembling against mine. Then we heard it. The stairs. They creaked, one by one, as something, or someone, descended into the dark. A shadow appeared at the top, faint and blurry, but there. We all saw it. The figure moved slowly, each step deliberate, until it stopped on the last stair. It stood there, just outside the beam of the flashlight, watching us. I could feel its gaze, heavy and cold, even though I couldn't make out its face. And then it vanished. The basement door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted. I grabbed Mary's hand, and we scrambled up the stairs, desperate to escape. When we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. Something held it shut. The whispers began then, low and guttural, circling us, saying our names. Emily started screaming, and Ethan clung to my leg, sobbing. I threw my shoulder against the door, again and again, until finally, it flew open. We didn't stop to gather anything. We fled into the night, piling into cars and speeding away, leaving behind the warmth of the fireplace, the smell of dinner, and every possession we owned. I don't know what we encountered that night, but I do know one thing. I'll never set foot in that house again. Thanksgiving is supposed to be a time for family, food, and gratitude. But for me, that year in Los Angeles, it became something much darker. Even now, I can't walk past a white rose without feeling the same cold dread creep up my spine. I was new to the city, trying to carve out a career in photography. My apartment was small, but it had charm, a cozy studio tucked on the second floor of an older building in Silver Lake, with a fire escape overlooking the street below. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Thanksgiving that year was quiet. Too quiet. My family was across the country, and I hadn't made many friends yet. I didn't mind the solitude, or at least I didn't think I would. I'd picked up a frozen turkey dinner and planned to spend the evening editing photos, hoping to distract myself from the loneliness. The first oddity happened around sunset. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my computer screen, when I felt it, an unsettling sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned instinctively toward the window, but all I saw were the usual sights: a couple of kids playing down the block, a car rolling past. Shrugging it off, I returned to my work. A couple of hours later, as I sat down to eat, the feeling came back, stronger this time. My apartment seemed unnaturally silent, the hum of the fridge and the occasional groan of the old pipes amplifying the unease. I glanced at the window again and froze. The latch was unhooked. I never left it unhooked. My stomach tightened. Slowly I crossed the room, telling myself it must have been my mistake, that I'd forgotten. But when I reached the window, I saw something that made my breath catch. A single white rose lying just beneath the sill. Its petals were pristine, except for one, curling brown at the edge. Someone had been inside. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived and searched the apartment. They assured me that no one was still there, though their reassurance felt thin. They dusted the rose for prints, but came up empty. Probably just some prank, one of them said. Still, get a better lock. These fire escapes are easy access. After they left, I double-checked every lock in the apartment, shoved a chair under the door handle, and spent the night wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old building. The next morning, I told myself it was over. A one-time event, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. My mail looked like it had been rifled through. My garbage cans were often tipped over, their contents scattered. I'd catch glimpses of someone, just a shadow, a silhouette, lingering across the street at night. Every time I turned to get a better look, they were gone. Then came the phone calls. At first I thought they were telemarketers. There'd be silence on the other end, maybe a faint breath, and then they'd hang up. But one night, the voice spoke, low and rasping, like someone forcing words through clenched teeth. "Do you like roses?" I hung up, my hands shaking, and disconnected the landline the next day. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. The calls continued on my cell phone. I changed my number. It didn't matter. Somehow they always found me. Each time the voice grew more menacing. They knew details about my life, where I worked, what I wore the day before. They described my apartment, down to the photos I'd hung on the walls. By mid-December, I was living in a state of constant fear. I bought pepper spray, installed a chain lock, and started carrying a pocket knife everywhere. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always there, watching, waiting. The breaking point came one cold, rainy night. I was editing photos again, trying to lose myself in my work, when my phone rang. My heart sank as I saw the unknown number flashing on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then, the voice. "I'm right outside." My stomach flipped. I dropped the phone and ran to the window, adrenaline surging through me. The fire escape was empty. But then I saw it. A single, white rose, resting on the metal grating just outside the glass. Whoever this was, they'd been close enough to leave it there. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the corner of the room, gripping the pocket knife in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call 911 at the first sign of movement. But nothing happened. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the apartment. I stayed with a friend for a few days, too afraid to go back. When I finally mustered the courage to return, I found another rose on the fire escape. No note, no fingerprints, just the flower, its petals starting to wilt. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never told my landlord why, and I never looked back. It's been years now, and I've rebuilt my life. I tell myself that whoever it was, they've long since moved on. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to the sound of my phone ringing. And in those moments I can almost hear the voice again, whispering through the static. I'm right outside. I had always thought of Thanksgiving as a time for gratitude, a time for family to come together and share a meal, laugh, and forget about the worries of the world. But that year, 1954, in Minnesota, the snow heavy and unrelenting against the windows, something was different. It wasn't just the biting cold creeping through the cracks in the walls, or the wind howling through the trees. No, something far more sinister had settled over our farmhouse, something that none of us could shake. It was Thanksgiving dinner, and I was carving the turkey, my hands unsteady, the knife slipping as my mind swirled with dark thoughts. My family sat around the table, their eyes fixed on me, but not in the way they used to. It was more like they were watching me out of fear, their smiles tight, their laughter forced. The room felt too small, the air too thick with the weight of unspoken words. I should have known, even before the blood appeared, that the night was destined to unravel. I should have known that when I sat at the head of the table, a man who had once been the pillar of this family, that my grip on control had long since slipped. The family didn't trust me. No one did anymore. Not since the incident. The thing that no one spoke of, not directly, but always indirectly, in the looks, in the whispers behind closed doors. The turkey was perfectly golden, the steam rising from it, filling the air with the comforting scent of roast meat. But I couldn't focus on that. No, my attention was elsewhere, on the faces around the table. Julie, Michael, little Timmy, my children, my wife, all looking at me as if I were a stranger. Even Eleanor, my dear, beautiful wife, sat there, her eyes not soft with love, but hard, distant. "Richard, you okay?" Eleanor's voice broke through my thoughts, but the words seemed hollow, distant. I looked at her, trying to force a smile, but it didn't come out right. My hand trembled as I reached for the carving knife, the polished silver glinting in the light. "Yeah, I'm fine," I muttered, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. I pressed the knife into the turkey's breast, the blade sliding through with a satisfying crack. But then my hand jerked. The knife slipped. Too much force, too little control, and before I knew it, the edge caught the palm of my hand. A gasp filled the room, and I looked down at my blood, bright and stark against the white tablecloth. It pooled around my fingers, a crimson stain spreading across the fabric. Too much. Too dark. I could feel their eyes on me, the tension thick as smoke. I quickly pulled my hand back, but the damage was done. The wound wasn't deep, but it bled freely, soaking my skin, my clothes, the linen. "You should go get that looked at," Michael said, his voice colder than usual. He was never like that. I didn't need his concern. I never needed any of them, not since that night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the blood, my blood, had awakened something. The warmth of it seemed to seep into the room, filling the spaces between us, touching the silence like an omen. Later, after I'd cleaned myself up and bandaged my hand, the family returned to their seats. But the unease hung over us like a fog. I could see it in their eyes. They knew. They must have known. How could they not? There were times, in the dead of night, when I'd wake up from a nightmare, sweating, heart pounding, and I'd lie there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside. In those moments, I couldn't escape the truth of what had happened all those years ago, before Michael was born, before Julie came along, before Timmy. It had been a fight. A simple thing, really. Land, money, the petty disputes that old men are prone to. But the other farmer, the one whose name I dare not speak, had gone too far. He'd pushed me, taunted me, and I'd snapped. I had struck him, not once, not twice, but again and again, until he was lying on the ground, his eyes staring up at me in shock, his mouth open in a silent scream. I never meant for it to happen. It was self-defense, I told myself. But when you're holding a man's life in your hands, how can you ever truly convince yourself of that? And I did convince myself. For years I convinced myself that it had been justified. But that didn't stop the nightmares. And it didn't stop the guilt that weighed on me every day, pulling me down until I couldn't breathe. And now, as I sat at that table, I knew, they knew what I had done. They could see it in my eyes. They could hear it in my voice. Eleanor, Michael, Julie, Timmy, they all knew. The conversation stilted, awkward. Julie's laughter had faded. Michael's eyes avoided mine. Even Timmy, who was too young to understand anything, had stopped his usual playfulness, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. I rose from my seat, my movements jerky, stiff, My mind raced. What was happening? Why couldn't I escape this feeling? I turned to the window, gazing out into the white expanse of snow, the wind cutting through the trees, howling its lonely song. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving just beyond the glass, a shadow darting in the storm. But when I looked again, there was nothing. I felt a chill deep in my bones, the kind that wasn't from the cold outside, but from something darker, something inside. Suddenly, the door creaked open. The wind blew in, bringing with it a gust of icy air that chilled me to the core. But no one moved, no one spoke. I looked back to the table. The faces of my family stared back at me, but their expressions had shifted. It was as if their features had become hollow, their eyes too wide, too knowing. They weren't human anymore. They were something else, something unnatural. I tried to speak, but no words came. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. The shadows in the room lengthened, twisting like fingers reaching toward me, and I realized the truth. I could never escape. The secret had already come for me. It had been waiting all along. The door slammed shut behind me, the wind howling louder than ever, and I knew deep in my soul that Thanksgiving, the one thing I had tried to protect, to preserve, was lost, just like everything else. And as the shadows closed in, I understood. I had never been the hunter. I had always been the prey.